All right, welcome to another episode of Changing Minds and Changing Lives. My name is Julie Sowash. I am still the Executive Director of Disability Solutions, and I am so happy that you all have joined us for another episode today. I just want to take a second and thank Andrea Dazelle, CEO and founder of The Seated Position, for joining us on our last episode. It was just a fantastic conversation with such a powerful voice in not just our community, but the healthcare community. And if you haven't listened, I definitely want you to go back and take a quick listen. It's about 25-minute conversation. She is phenomenal, new to me, so hopefully new to you as well, and a great new connect. I am also so excited to announce that Wes Hamilton of Queer Eye fame and founder of Disabled But Not Really has agreed to join us on a future episode of the podcast. I am a complete fangirl, if that's not obvious. And if you have not seen Wes's Queer Eye or know anything about his amazing network of gyms across the country that are for people with disabilities, we will put in the show notes a link to that episode of Queer Eye and a link to Wes's page about him and about his gym. So amazing. But today, I am also very excited to welcome Jamie Shields, who I have to tell you, there are several people on my team at Disability Solutions who are fangirling over Jamie and love the work and the content that you've been putting out over the last year or so. Jamie is our first guest from across the pond. He's joining us from Belfast, Northern Ireland today. Jamie is the CEO and founder of Disabled by Society, disabledbysociety.com, if you want to check it out. He's been recognized as one of the 100 most influential disabled people in the UK and is on the Diversity Power List, which sounds awesome, that recognizes the best of the best DEI champions across the UK. Welcome to Changing Minds, Changing Lives, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me. When I was listening to you give that introduction, firstly, I'm obsessed with Queer Eye as well, so I'm so jealous. I'll be listening to that episode. But secondly, that bio makes me sound amazing, so thank you.
Well, I just read it. You did the work, so you seem pretty amazing. So tell me, give me your 30-second Twitter bio. Who is Jamie Shields? Tell me a little bit more about you.
Yes, so I describe myself as a registered blind ADHD rhino because I'm autistic. I'm ADHD. Apparently, I collect disabilities like Pokemon cards. The older I get, the more I learn about myself. And I essentially help brands make inclusive, accessible change.
So we were exchanging emails when we were getting ready to do this podcast together, and I love your signature line. And so I just want to catch that again. Tell me what your signature line says, because you just said it to me.
Registered blind ADHD rhino, because rhinos are just chubby unicorns.
Okay, thank you. So in America, that means Republican in name only. So I've been trying to ponder what that could possibly mean, the rhino part, for several weeks. So thank you for joining us. I'm so excited. You have such an interesting background that really speaks to just my passion and our passion at Disability Solutions about helping companies really hire people with disabilities, really retain and grow that talent. And, that's really where your background is too. And, so from the companies that we work with and American TA leaders that I talk to on a regular basis, it seems to be like there's a pretty good deal of interest in hiring and figuring out sort of how does the UK work for hiring people with disabilities. And a lot of times I feel like the UK is doing better than we are as Americans, which I don't love to say, but I do feel like is true. Kind of from your perspective, just I would say both your lived perspective, but also your professional, kind of your business and consulting perspective. How is the UK doing? And specifically, how is Northern Ireland doing?
Yeah, I think I always preface this question by saying I think there's parts of the world that do so much better than other countries. Like, for example, Germany, they have such a better support for a disabled person within employment. It's harder to dismiss a disabled person. They have tax benefits. They have an earlier retirement age, and there's proper laws in place to really support that individual, whereas we don't have that in the UK. So I always say there's parts of the world that do really good, but I think we just need to kind of come together better globally, don't we, to kind of share notes and say what is best practice. So for me, I think the UK, I think we do some things right. And I think a lot of what we do and what we see is actually quite performative. So, for example, within the UK, we have what's called the Disability Confidence Scheme, which is a government led scheme that is meant to help employers attract and retain disabled talent. There's three levels of accreditation. Level one is you sign up and it's a commitment. We're going to hire disabled people and we're going to retain them, which sounds great. Level two is a self assessment, which is you declaring yourself a confident employer. We are confidently doing these actions. And then to get to level three, you have to go get a self assessment, an assessment through a third party. So that third party could be somebody else who is disability confident. It could be a client, it could be a friend, or it may be somebody that you've just outsourced completely to. Is it a confidence scheme and does it install confidence in disabled job seekers? The answer is no.
Okay.
Particularly for the levels one and two, we see a lot of performative work in the space. There's no mandatory reporting. There's nobody kind of coming in and checking in on this and saying what are you actually doing to retain this accreditation. So I think in theory it sounds great, but I think in reality we don't see that action. And I think as well, if we look at particularly with Northern Ireland, I think Northern Ireland is such a own little gemstone of the world with a colourful history. But when we look at the current state of Northern Ireland, we have our own government, so we don't take mandate from the UK government. We have our own government to decide how those laws will kind of shape and maybe be changed to kind of suit Northern Ireland, which was formed under the Good Friday Agreement. However, we haven't had a working government until last week for almost, I think, 5 years.
5 years?
It might actually have been longer. There was a political I'm trying to think of the right word, a political game where parties didn't want to sit in government together because of one party was predominantly Catholic, the other is predominantly Protestant, and for the first time in history, we had a predominantly Catholic party be elected as finance minister. The other party, who's always a power, didn't like that. So there's been a lot of games going on, and unfortunately, Northern Ireland has just kind of slipped under the radar. We have a working government now, though, as of last week, so it's amazing.
Congratulations.
But a lot has to be caught up. You know, if we look at things in particularly around the neurodiverse space, even in Northern Ireland, you know, for Northern Ireland to get a referral, to get an assessment for ADHD or autism or any other kind of neurodivergence, you could be waiting 3+ years. If you want to be private, the private waiting list is 2+ years. And I think for me, that is such a big challenge. And I'm not saying the UK has it perfect, because the UK is just as bad. There's parts of the UK wait 7 years. But I think when we look at the UK and we start to kind of go beneath what our governments are putting out there or what we see on social media, I think when you start to really look beneath everything, you notice so many failings and things have been done to a standard that has been quite performative. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to go on. And I think everywhere has that. I think we are always our own worst critique in a way, aren't we? When you live something and it's your daily, you're easier to critique it. But I think some of the good that we see is, I think we see a lot of advocates standing up in the UK now, a lot of different organisations forming who are saying enough is enough. You have had the chance as a government to fix this and you haven't went beyond. In fact, our government just got rid of our disability minister, but that's a whole other story. And I'm you on a journey already.
So I swear we could probably talk for an hour just on what you just said, because it was a rich amount of information. A lot of it I hadn't quite put together, and some of it I did know. One thing that you said that really caught me is the performative, right? And so, you know, in America, we have companies that pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a self-assessment on how great of a disability inclusive employer they are. And when we talk to our clients, I'm like, you know what? That is a really great PR activity. It's a fantastic PR activity. And when you're actually hiring people with disabilities and you've got your disability kind of ducks in a row inside your company, then that's a great time to have that conversation. But no company on the planet should be getting 100%.
No.
And they shouldn't be getting 100% year over year. It's such baloney.
I know what we're talking about. I know what accreditation that is, because I am based in the UK, but I work full time for a company as long as at the side of being a founder and CEO. need to get used to saying CEO there.
Yes.
But for me, I work globally as our recruitment or just a disability and accessibility lead. And I think for me, the shift with clients in this space, and when they see these accreditations or these awards or scales of awards and they jump for it, I'm like, but you haven't done the work. If you
You
haven't done
haven't?
the work, how are you expecting to place so high on a list? And then they end up
Yes.
placing.
Yes. You haven't done the work.
Yeah,
I mean, and that's the perfect way to say it, because like we say this is a lifetime's worth of work, and if you think you've finished, you've failed. You
yeah,
need to keep going. And so I think that, we are seeing not only kind of a rise in America in the same way of that sort of, we're tired of you slapping on a badge. We're tired of you, doing XYZ that you paid a lot of money for. I want to see numbers. I want to see hires. I want to see retention.
yep.
And that is actually what matters. And then the other thing that you said that I think is so important, that is missed, I would say almost universally, by whether it's government or it's corporations, is that they never think about us at the beginning. There's always this like, hey, we're putting in a new applicant tracking system. Hey, we're doing all of these DEI things. And they go, oh, yeah, those disabled folks, they'd probably be
Yep.
maybe like 10 months after we started, 10 years after we started. Um, and and then even more holistically, how you mentioned Germany and the things that they do as a population that help support people with disabilities much sooner in their lives and more holistically. So a lot of times I'm talking to companies now and I'm going, hey, you know what? Union rights are disability rights. Labor rights are disability rights. Return to office policies are impacting disability rights, healthcare, all those things. And, to kind of come back to the UK, if I can full circle this little journey that we're on here for a second, a lot of my friends who primarily live in England have been talking to me about how alarmed they are lately about some of the moves that the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has or is putting in place regarding sort of removal of certain legal protections for people with disabilities who either are not able to work or haven't found a disability confident employer yet. Can you speak to what you're seeing from Rishi Sunak and, if I'm correct, the Labour Party, and how that's sort of changing the employment conversation for you guys?
Yeah, I think for me, what's happening, I'm not surprised. And this is the thing. I think when we see governments act out like this, I think, why are we surprised? We just have to look at the behaviours of what they're doing to other marginalised identities. And, we've seen this Prime Minister, who, by the way, is an elected Prime Minister. We didn't choose him. His party chose him. So he wasn't actually elected by the people, because that party hasn't been able to put a leader in place in donkey knows how long. But for me, I look at it and I think, well, look what they've been doing to the trans community. We had the global headlines around the death of Brianna Gray, who was murdered for being a trans young person. But yet, our Prime Minister sat in the chamber last week, as her parents were in the chamber, and openly made a comment that disregarded. It was basically around identity and how we were confusing female identity, and it was just like, this child's parents are in the gallery, and you are openly being transphobic. And then we look at the party and the behaviours that's going on with the party, and then I think to myself, are we surprised? We are coming up to general election. This party is trying to now converse and kind of sway the very hard extreme right to show, we're not taking DI no more. We are not dealing with trans rights or disability rights. And I think to myself again, why are we surprised? Like, we've seen this slowly build. And then I think when it comes and affects, now this affecting the disabled community, and you'd said it before, you can't just have one right and deny the rights of another. Trans rights or disabled rights, your rights as a LGBTQIA plus person is still disabled rights. These rights all intersect, and that's where we need to be looking at disability through that intersectional lens. But for me, I think I see a fear, and I think of my own journey. So I have been very privileged. I have a job now for 4.5 years. I now have my own side business, but I struggled for all of my life. I had more jobs than hot dinners. I struggled to retain and gain employment. I was ghosted. I was rejected. You can't be disabled, or we don't hire disabled people. So this attitude was already there. And for me, I look back at that and I think, do I see an improvement from when I'm 4.5 years ago to now in the job market or the scale of the employment market? And I don't. It's exactly the same. I have friends who are still going through the same process, friends who get rejected because they've asked for that adjustment or accommodation, which, by the way, we know is illegal, but there's no paper trail for this. So I think for me, I see the fear and I see what the government's trying to do. I see it as almost like a scare tactic by them to scare disabled people into work when they think it's this really easy thing that we can do, when they don't actually acknowledge the fact or sit down and listen to disabled job seekers or people who have struggled. They haven't listened to that lived experience, what is saying, well, actually, it's not that we don't want these jobs, it's that we're trying and we're failing. They're not accessible, they're not inclusive. And when we do come and try to apply, we're rejected once as soon as we share. So I think the government here is, I think for me, it's a part of a bigger crackdown on DEI within the UK because they're trying to get those votes. But I think if this party is voted out, I really hope this next government comes in and steps in because we cannot mandate disabled people to be going to offices to work in if they're going to struggle to retain that employment, because it's all well and good to hire us, but you've got to be able to upskill us, develop us, promote us, because again, it all comes down to that performance. And for me, like I'm 34 now, and I know I don't look over 21, but for myself, I think I um, I didn't get promoted until I was over 30. Like I didn't know what it meant to feel belonging in the workplace. And it wasn't through want to try, because I would take any job. I had so many jobs in call centres, which I could never use the systems. I didn't get adjustments, but I tried. And I think of the the mental health implications that had to me as a disabled person, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So do we really want to get into a place where we're pushing disabled people into roles that are not going to fulfill them, that are not going to sustain them? And how do we support the backlash of that? How do we support what will become a national crisis with the impact of and psychological trauma that is internalized ableism? Because that's all we're going to foster in those individuals. They will struggle. So, long-winded answer. This government, I think, I don't know if I'm going to say this, and I hope it's okay, but they need to go.
Oh, please. I want you to say exactly what you think.
They need to go.
And I just happen to agree. I was in London for TA Tech in December, and I saw Sunak's conference on the immigration crackdown, and it was terrifying. And had dinner with a friend who lives just in London, and he's blind, and he kind of started talking to me about how they're going to be changing these policies and these employment schemes. And I think that I saw him go through this journey, and he got a job about a year ago with an amazing company, but it was 2 years that honestly I worried about him on a regular basis because he was applying and applying. We redid his resume or his CV. We did all of the things, and there was no reason for him not to have a job other than that every time he walked in to an interview, the hiring manager just completely shut down. I think pushing that back into, I love the way that you brought that together on the internalized ableism, to continuously force people into situations where they're not going to be successful is going to drive up mental health issues, suicides, those types of things that we are so vulnerable to as people who live with disabilities in ways that people without disabilities also experience but can't understand in the same lived experience. So I appreciate you. Full disclosure for the audience, I asked Jamie before if we could have like a mini political conversation because this is such interesting kind of connotations for me, as well as just being a political junkie. So I appreciate you indulging me.
Oh, here, anytime. As I said, open book. I will throw everything at a conversation, including the kitchen sink. But I think it's so important, though. I think this is what we don't see enough in this space, though, is it? We don't see disabled people talking about politics. We don't see disabled people talking about sex. We don't see them talking about relationships. It's like we are scapegoated to this one conversation around employment. And it's just like, well, we're being impacted in all these other areas of society. Bring us to the conversation. We're not just your disabled speaker for disabled events. Disabled experience is part of the human experience. Invite us to everything.
Yes. And so, I love that because so often in America, again, we have National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and that's what companies always used to celebrate as their Heritage Month for people with disabilities. And when it started in I think it was just after World War II, it was called Hire the Handicapped Week, which
Oof.
was great. But I would get so frustrated with companies. I'm like, guys, it's Disability Employment Month. You're not talking about us as people humanly as a holistic version of a person who wants to get to work, yes, who wants to be able to raise their family, who wants to get married, who wants to go to the club on Friday night, whatever they want to do is just treated as this one-dimensional thing of employment. And we've seen kind of a shift, I would say, over the last couple of years to Disability Pride Month, which I think is still too performative, but it's showing us that we're making a step in the right direction in terms of the conversation, and that's what has to change first. Are you seeing that shift in your world at all, or is it still very much that employment only focus?
I think Disability Pride Month is a really interesting one because it originated in the US, and we're now seeing that kind of being knocked out and rolled out across the world. This sense of pride, and I feel the same as you. These, in the companies I've worked in, we call them milestones, and I've always thought, well, these are really performative because we're just getting people to talk about the topic, and we're not seeing actual action. And so when I became ERG lead, my first mission was to how do we actually make action here. So I think every milestone that we've ever celebrated, and I think we celebrate a few across the year now, like Neurodiversity Celebration Week, Disability Pride Month, International Day of Persons with Disability. I'm probably missing one, National Disability Employment Awareness Month. These milestones, what we actually targeted to do was how do we get our colleagues to actually talk about what they want to see, or how do we educate about the barriers that people will never understand, or how do we break down a conversation that unless you've lived experience, you're not going to be able to fully engage and participate with. So we created learning videos, and each milestone there had to be a certain amount of educational resources created before we would even consider starting a panel. But I also think for Disability Pride Month, we started seeing it in the UK, and we last year had an expedition for the first time, which was done by Disability Expo, and they held together this two-day conference, and there was thousands of disabled people who came together to kind of share and talk, and there was panels, and it was all singing, all dancing, and it was really great. And I think I like to see that. It's like, where's the community in these events? Because that's the problem is we don't see ourselves before employment. And it's the same in the UK. A lot of the support even that you go out and if you're at these kind of conventions or expeditions, a lot of the support is aimed towards a certain type of disability, a physical disability, a wheelchair user. And then I think of people like myself, I'm like, well, it's all well and good for me to go and support these things, but what do I take away from this as a registered blind person? What support have I run into, or what incredible adjustment that I've never seen before? And it doesn't happen. So I think there's still this gap of knowledge, isn't there, in disability, that people still feel to understand the diversity of disability or the complexity of disability. And I think that behind these milestones, I wish that we would push that education out more than I don't care what your CEO is going to say on Disability Pride Month. I don't care what they're going to say in a panel on International Day. I want to know what your colleagues are saying. I want to see what you're doing, because for me, those milestones and this is what I advise my clients, is they're not tick box. Yes, I'm done. They're reflections. Okay, so International Day is your end of year. What have you done in the past 12 months? What did you target yourself on last year? And what have you got to? Disability Pride Month. I know it's 7 months into the year, but I always say that's your midpoint. Look what you've done at the start of that month. Go through, review it with your colleagues, and for the next 6 months, steer it. So yes, use these milestones, because the opportunities I think they create for just people like myself who are speakers, or people who are trainers who are on LinkedIn. I'm like, use those to bring those people in, but equally make sure what you're working on is actually driving change. So I went off on a tangent there, but I think I'll summarize by saying that I think these milestones are important. And I think in the UK, we didn't have as many for disability, but I think last year was probably the first year in a very long time I've seen a boom with Disability Pride Month. And I loved it because I just loved seeing these companies actually hiring disabled people and my clients themselves bringing in people to speak or, as I said, to create resources. And I look at those resources now in January, and just the other day, I had somebody email and say, can we use these resources with clients? And I went, no, but we can make them with your client. So it's a conversation starter as well. So go more with your intent. Don't just celebrate for the sake of having a milestone.
Mhm.
It needs to really be a reflection, an action, or a commitment to what's next to come.
No, I love that. And I felt the same way about disability resource groups
Mm-hmm.
when I first got into this world, 10 or so years ago. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to throw picnics and they're doing this and they're doing that, and yes, some of them are, but at least they're brave enough to have a
Yeah.
conversation and to recognize the community. But then you see some that are just doing the most incredible work, that are led by people with disabilities, not by parents and caregivers, which definitely have a place, but
Yeah.
it's like it is actually a disability led conversation. And I think it really has kind of shifted the conversation, at least in the US, to something that is more like, hey, I'm sitting right here. Don't talk about me in the third person, and I think that's where I've really grown to love the power of a disability resource or an employee resource group, kind of however you talk about it. Um, so just from you were, correct me if I'm wrong, your day job, your day gig is you work in recruitment and you work as a leader within a disability resource group. Is that right?
So I did. That's how my route started. I actually retired as a disability ERG lead this month. No, sorry, last month is February now, or March. I don't even know what month it is. So when I did this ERG lead, I did it for 2.5 years,
Okay.
and it was very much led by colleagues with disabilities. And I love that you made the comment around parents and caregivers, because I think what happens in these spaces is when we don't have the colleagues who feel comfortable to share or step into these positions, what we see is parents step into these positions or caregivers, and then what we see happen is very, which I call fluffy language around disability, which is we become inspirational people or
Yep.
inspiring superheroes or differently abled. And I think you can usually tell which ERGs have been named by the disabled community or somebody with
Oh
lived
yeah.
experience over caregivers. Spoiler, I'm not going into which ones because my clients might come chasing me. But I think for me, it's having that lived experience. I came into that role 2.5 years ago, and that ERG, there was a community there, but there wasn't real action. And I think the momentum that we've seen in the past 2.5 years, we became an award-winning ERG, which sounds really fancy, but like for me, I cried when we found out, because I was just like, how did we do this? And I then had to stop and actually start to reflect on what we had done. And I looked at the state of the organization when I started, and then I looked at it after we had won the award, and the conversations, not just from leaders or the CEO, from colleagues and other teams coming in to learn about disability or asking to join it as an ally. We've seen that membership increase, I think like 67% in the first year that we were there. And it's like the impact that you can have when you have actual people with lived experience behind the conversation is
Hmm.
incredible. And we had a parents and caregivers group who worked at the side of the ERG and created that space for parents and caregivers, because one of the things I think we kept taking feedback was, I love hearing these panels, but I don't like to hear a parent talking about disability in this way because it's interfering with this person's story. And I think there's a space for both. We have to respect that
Yep.
space. And I think it's just about how you mitigate it. But for me, I think an ERG or employee network, whatever you call it, employee ERG is just employee resource group. For me, there's a real sense of community, but for me,
Hmm.
it was empowerment, because before I came into the workplace, as I said, I struggled. I had so much internalized ableism. I had suffered with my mental health. I think I should do a warning here. I had binge drank, I had self-harmed, I had attempted suicide. And the cause of that was my identity, was my disability, was my sexuality, and the fact that I didn't feel belonging. But becoming an ERG lead, it gave me this confidence to talk about my disability in a way that I had never done before. And I think because there was a group of people, our community, who I wanted to feel psychologically safe in that space to talk about theirs. And when I looked at the last meeting there we were in January, when I passed over the new lead, we have colleagues who come on those calls and now will say, this manager's done X, Y, Z and it's not right. How do we fix it? And before you know it, you have all these different colleagues with lived experience stepping up. And it's not just like entry level roles, your band ones, your band twos, there's managers there talking about their experience with autism. And we did a video with one manager who explained autism, and he gave the most beautiful definition of what it's like to be autistic. And as an autistic person, I am obsessed. And it was, as an autistic person, you're walking alongside your typical person who's wearing shoes and socks. However, being autistic, you're actually walking on the beach where your feet burn, you're feeling the sand beneath you. So everything's just a very different feel. And we did this video, launched it, and the impact of that and seeing actual representation was incredible. So for me, I think ERGs, you have to support them. You can't just set up these groups and expect them to take care of themselves. You need to be giving them budget. You need to be giving those leaders time, because you cannot manage a day job, manage a disability, and manage an ERG. You need time carved out. And I got very lucky because I don't want to say I threatened to quit, but I wanted to work with a DI, and I said to my DI director, if I can't get a role DI at this company, I'm going to have to leave, because I've now had a taste of what it's like to be a lead. And my role became my permanent role. And I took you on a journey here. You asked me about being the RG lead, and I've given you the kitchen sink.
No, I just no, I'm mesmerized. So one, I want to say thank you for sharing that part of yourself, because I know even though we have this privilege of being able to talk about who we are in a way that a lot of people don't, it means so much to someone who lives with mental illness, who lives with, cognitive processing disorders and all those things, to hear someone else share that story. And I know how impactful it is to people. And so I kind of want to wrap up before I ask my final two questions. One thing that I love that you do is that you do share your whole self. So you are talk about just on your website the intersectionality of being a gay disabled man. Can you kind of take us a little bit on that journey? I don't want to steer you any direction. I just want to kind of hear about how you became your whole self and how you got to a place where you were really comfortable sharing all of that so publicly.
Yeah, so like again, growing up in Northern Ireland, like I said, colourful history. You can't be any kind of different in Northern Ireland apart from your religion. It was always, are you Catholic or Protestant? You would never be asked if you're disabled or about your sexuality, but you couldn't be gay or different in the community because it wasn't okay in Northern Ireland growing up. And in fact, a lot of politicians, I think it wasn't until like 2018, 19, when we actually were able to legally marry as gay individuals in Northern Ireland or same sex couples. Um, and the UK had that a few years before. The south of Ireland, which although we're connected, is a completely different country and as part of the EU, we're no longer. Very complicated geography. But for me, I grew up knowing that being gay was something you couldn't be. I grew up knowing that being disabled was this horrible, shameful thing not to talk about because people were treating me differently for that. But when I was being bullied in school for being disabled, I was being bullied for being disabled, kids then started calling me gay boy, which confused me because obviously I was already struggling with being disabled. Bringing in the additional struggles of being gay just kind of complicated things. So I struggled to communicate how I was feeling. I struggled to accept that I was gay. And even at like 15, 16, I still had a girlfriend. And I was very much gay. I knew I was gay in my heart, but it was like keeping up with the Joneses appearance. And I was still very much, and I know it's probably going to sound silly, but I was still very much a child thinking at that age. If you think of 15-year-old now, they are out in the phones. They're looking to go drinking behind everybody's back. They're miniature adults. Whereas when I was that age, I didn't have that mentality. I would go out with my friends, and when I say friends, it was like these two guys who played football. So I didn't actually really was a friend because they couldn't play football. But they would bring me around with them, and I would kind of just follow them around. And I had this girlfriend, but I would go home and play with my Action Man and Barbie with my sister, and I would play with my figurines because I didn't have the social skills. So I was masking so much to keep up. So I think the breaking point for me was what I mentioned earlier about my own history of my mental health. And it was after that instant, I kind of sat down and had a conversation with my mummy, and I said, you can tell I'm Irish mummy. So and I said to my mummy, I was just like, I really don't like who I am as a person. I don't want to be gay. I don't want to be disabled. And like it was a very deep conversation, and I was sitting with a bandage on my wrist and things, and it was a very dramatic conversation. But my mum was just like, you can't change who you are. And she's just like, so stop trying to change for the world. The world needs to change for you. And it was very deep, but I kind of felt tears in my eyes going there. So I'm not crying, but I think for me it was a very difficult journey to get to the point of knowing that it was okay to be gay, it was okay to be disabled. And I think that the pressures that then came with that when I started to accept myself was, how do you come out and then come out again? It's like, hi, I'm gay and I'm disabled. And where does that fit in? So I think for me, that lesson was a hard lesson to learn of loving yourself. Or as RuPaul says, how the hell can you love somebody else if you can't love yourself? And I really do believe that, because that's what shaped me who I am. But I think when I look back on anybody, on intersectionality in particular, I think because of the experiences I went through of being gay and disabled, I think that's why I'm a little bit more open to understanding and stopping and saying, well, actually, we can't come at disability through just this white lens. We have to hear the intersectional lived experiences. We need to have panels that are diverse. And, it's one of the things I now pride myself on is, if not pride myself, but I'm very rigid with myself, if you will. If somebody invites me to a panel and I know it's an all-white panel, I'm not getting on that panel, because our experiences, yes, we may have different disabilities, but where are we bringing in intersectionality? Where, if it's all a straight panel and we're talking about LGBT History Month, it's like, well, that's not going to really cover it. So I think, or I've been in panels that talk about intersectionality and it's all white people as well, and I think we have to get to the stage where you understand that disability is not binary. Diversity has no one appearance. You can't define diversity with one person. So when we're talking about disability, we have to bring in those lenses, because the experiences I feel as a disabled white gay man is going to be extremely different to how a black disabled gay person is going to feel. So taking a journey there, and I got a wee bit emotional, but yeah.
No, I will tell you. So I am the mom of a gay young man who, if your mom is like me, was like, yeah, dude, I knew that. Like,
Yeah.
for years, I just been waiting on you to figure it out. And so thank you to your mom for being amazing. Because that's so critically important, to have that acceptance from your parents. So that is a blessing. And I got a little teary eyed kind of remembering that moment with my son. But I thank you. It's so important. Again, like employment, we see people with disabilities as only their disability, and we are a whole bunch of other things that we also want to celebrate and live. So last two questions, because even though this is a new podcast, I am trying to end every interview with two questions. The first one: what is something that you would tell a hiring leader, whether it's frontline or CEO, that would change their mind about hiring people with disabilities?
Yeah, I think I don't want to say I like to scare people, but I like to remind people of the fact that we see disability as this faraway experience. It's never going to come knocking on our door, or we don't have to worry about. And what we actually fail to realize is that disability is very much part of the human experience. We will all experience either temporary or permanent disability. We look at the statistics: 70% of people, or 80% of people, are acquire their disability, as opposed to the 20% born with it. So disability will impact you sometime. You may be a bone, we're aging. There's so many different scenarios, but equally, if it's not you, it could be your partner, it could be your child, it could be your grandson, your grandchild, or it could be your best friend. So it's not about making a case for why we should make things inclusive for disabled people. It's a case of why aren't we future planning for your potential friends and family who are going to come through these doors.
Love it. So what is one thing, one action that happened in your life that helped change your life? And you have shared a lot already, so you might just skip this question, but if you want to share something else, I want to hear so much.
I think one action that has changed my life, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be really cheesy, is my partner. And I know it sounds really cheesy, because for me, when I think I've been with my partner, actually, nearly 6, 7 years maybe. And still no ring, I know.
Oh,
But still, not yet. Maybe this year. But I think when I think about who I was, and I know this is probably going to be a real cliche, but I was pretty much blindly wandering, and I didn't know what it was like to have a relationship. This is my first real adult relationship, and to find somebody who was also neurodivergent and autistic as well. We went through that journey together. I think that was the pivotal moment of probably our relationship, and probably my life, is that I know I have a partner who gets it. And I call him my eyes, because he does things for me without ever having to ask. I knew I loved him because we were at a restaurant, and he took the menu and he was reading it to me before I had to even ask to say, could you read this to me? So to me, that's what love is. It's those little silly acts. So the moment that changed my life is my partner, because behind They always, that saying, behind every good woman there's a man, or behind every good man there's a woman. I don't even know what the saying is, but for me, I'm like, behind every rhino there's a man, because he's the person who helps me make change with myself and challenges me in ways that I don't think anybody else could. So my partner is the thing that changed my life, I think.
Amazing, amazing,
Such
amazing.
a cliche.
No, I love it. Trust me, we have a lot in common. I'll tell you that. Jamie Shields, CEO and founder of Disabled by Society. Where can people find you on the socials?
Yes, so on LinkedIn, it's just my name, Jamie Shields, or Disabled by Society is my business page. I do have Twitter. Now, it's not Disabled by Society because the handle was too long. So it's Dis by Society on Twitter. And if you want to check out my website, just disabledbysociety.com. But yeah, reach out whatever way you feel best to you or most accessible to you.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you all for joining us for what will probably be one of my favorite conversations of 2024. Until next time, we'll see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.